Have you ever felt like your world was falling apart and no one around you could truly understand? Like God was silent, and deep inside, the only thing you wanted was to give up completely. If that's how you feel today, I ask you, please stay with me until the end of this message. Because maybe, just maybe, this is the very message God wanted you to hear right now. There are moments when life feels like the ground is being ripped out from under our feet. Everything feels out of place, and no matter how hard you try, nothing seems to work out. Maybe it's a breakup that shattered your dreams, or a loss that took away your sense of peace. It could be a sudden illness, the shock of being let go from work, or a silent sadness nobody sees. And it's in these very dark moments that many people feel tempted to simply give up. But here's what most don't realize. In your darkest hours, God is actually closer than ever. When your strength fades away, that's exactly where His supernatural power begins to work. In the second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4, verses 8 through 9, it says, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned." Those words were written by Paul, who endured prison, shipwrecks, and persecution without losing faith. His life proves that suffering isn't the end of the road. It's often the beginning of transformation. Think about it. How many times have you whispered, maybe just in your heart, "I can't take this anymore"? How many nights did you cry silently in the bathroom, not wanting to look weak to others? Or laid your head on the pillow, surrounded by people, yet feeling completely alone inside? These experiences are more common than you think. And if you're hearing this, know this truth. You are not alone. What you feel, thousands of others feel too, every single day. But the difference is made by those who choose to keep walking, even when their hearts are broken. Ever noticed how trees grow stronger after storms? Harsh winds force their roots deeper into the ground. The same goes for your life. The struggles you face today are building your strength for tomorrow. And if you give up now, you'll never know just how far you were meant to go. You might feel wounded, tired, or lost, but you're still standing. And while you breathe, there is hope. You may wonder, how can I go on when everything looks hopeless? The answer lies within you. There's still a spark of faith inside you. Tiny maybe, but more than enough for God to work with. Remember the mustard seed? Jesus said even faith the size of that can move mountains. So even if your faith feels weak, use what remains, because that small flame can light a fire. Now picture this. A single mother giving her all for her kids, though her fridge is nearly empty. A teenager longing to learn, facing rejection at home and bullying at school. An elderly man who feels forgotten by society, yet still chooses to wake up with purpose. They all endure storms. Why? Because they believe today's pain is not greater than tomorrow's promise. Do you remember the story of Nelson Mandela? His hope lived on through decades of suffering. He spent 27 years behind bars, 27 long years where most people would have given up. But he didn't, because he believed in something greater, in a purpose that went far beyond prison walls. When he was finally released, he became the president of South Africa and a global symbol of hope and endurance. Nelson Mandela proved that suffering doesn't cancel a promise. It simply prepares the soil for its fulfillment. Need another example? Oprah Winfrey, one of the most influential women in the world, but it wasn't always that way. Abused as a child, raised in deep poverty, constantly facing prejudice, she had every reason to give up. But she didn't. She chose to keep going, to turn pain into power, scars into wisdom, and failure into fuel. And you? Are you going to let your story end in this painful chapter? Or will you turn the page and keep writing? Even if your hands are shaking, even if your voice trembles, your story still matters. Don't stop now. I want to invite you to try something simple yet powerful, an exercise that could shift your entire perspective. For 7 days, every night, write down in a notebook 3 moments when you didn't give up, even if you felt like it. It doesn't matter how small. Getting out of bed, facing the day, being kind when you felt drained, they all count. At the end of the week, read it all back and realize this truth. You are not weak. You are far stronger than you know. The pain you feel today does not define who you are. It is just part of the journey, not the final destination. God has not forgotten you. He sees your fight. He sees your tears, even the ones no one else ever notices. And as long as you're standing, even if you're barely holding on, He will continue to carry and sustain you. Don't give up now. The world still needs to hear your story of victory, your testimony of rising again. Can you feel that? That stirring deep within? That's God whispering to you, hold on just a little longer, child. Your breakthrough is on the way. How many times have you asked yourself in silence, why is this happening to me? Maybe you kept it quiet because no one around you seems to understand the depth of your pain and confusion. You pray, you try, you fight to keep the faith, but it feels like heaven is silent and answers never come. All you want is to understand, to know there's meaning in the chaos, that this pain isn't pointless. But what if I told you, your pain is not a punishment, it's preparation for what's to come? What if the wound that's bleeding today is the very place where God will perform His greatest miracle in your life? Sometimes suffering has no clear explanation, and that's when most people give up, because they want answers. They want logic, control, understanding. But faith begins where understanding ends. Faith is choosing to trust even when nothing makes sense, believing God is in control even when life feels out of control. Look around. How many times have you done things your way, in your own strength, and it still didn't work out? Often what looks like a delay or a dead end is actually God's protection or redirection in disguise. Sometimes He withholds what we ask for, not because He's cruel, but because He's preparing something far greater. Have you ever thought, maybe what you're calling failure today is actually just a step toward your calling? In Scripture, Joseph is a powerful example, from betrayal to prison to purpose, from sorrow to elevation. He was betrayed by his own brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison, and left behind for many years. Yet even through it all, his faith remained unshaken. He didn't let pain corrupt his belief or allow bitterness to steal the purpose God had for him. Joseph knew the process was part of the promise. Because he stayed faithful, God lifted him up. The boy who was rejected became the ruler over all of Egypt. The one who was humbled was raised in honor. And what did he say to the brothers who betrayed him? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. That is spiritual maturity, knowing that what others meant to break us, God can use to shape our destiny and bring us closer to His plan. Now tell me, how many times have you been hurt by the people you loved the most? How many doors closed right when you needed them open? How many times did you think it was the end, only to find out later it was God repositioning you for something greater? The scars life leaves on you are not signs of failure. They are proof that you made it through, that you kept going even when broken. And if you're still going, that means there is still hope, still purpose, because God isn't done writing your story. Let's look at real life. Let's step outside the Bible for a moment and talk about people today whose lives reflect that same truth. Think of Tyler Perry, abused as a child, lived on the streets, slept in his car, but he didn't quit. He kept writing plays no one came to see. He kept believing when no one else believed, and today he's one of the most powerful producers and entrepreneurs in all of Hollywood. He often says, God brought me to the bottom so I could see that He is the rock at the bottom. Another story? Steve Harvey. He's now a well-known host, comedian, and author, recognized all over the world. But did you know he lived in his car for 3 years? Yes, 3 full years without a home, without knowing where his next meal would come from. But he believed what he was living wasn't the end. It was just a curve in the road, and he was right. These stories remind us that today's pain can become tomorrow's testimony, that brokenness is part of the refining, not the end. God does not waste suffering. He turns tears into wisdom, loss into growth, silence into direction. Have you ever thought that maybe you're the right person, just living in the wrong moment, so you can arrive at the right destination? How many times have you prayed for guidance, for transformation, but the change came disguised as loss, confusion, or crisis? And now you see, all that looked like chaos was really God shifting things so you'd land exactly where you were meant to be. This is how God works. He tears down to rebuild His way. He breaks what's temporary to restore it with a Father's hands. So if you're in a dark valley today, it's not the time to panic, it's time to trust, to hold tightly to God's hand and say, I don't understand, but I'm still standing. Your pain is not pointless. God is writing something through you, something that will heal others once your story is told. A story that will inspire someone who's thinking about quitting, just like you once did before you kept going. So I invite you to see your pain differently, not as a burden, but as a seed. Because everything God plants, He harvests, and right now, He's planting something beautiful in you, even if you can't see it yet. But soon you will understand. And when you finally get there, you'll look back and say, "Now I get it. Every step had a purpose." Don't stop halfway through the journey. Just because it's hard now doesn't mean it's not worth it. If God is allowing it, it's because He's building something eternal, something you can't yet see. You haven't been forgotten. You're being prepared, molded, and shaped for something greater. Some days feel like you've run a marathon without moving an inch, like the world moves on and you're stuck. And in those moments you wonder, is it really worth it to keep going? The truth is, yes, it absolutely is. Because those who refuse to quit go places most people never even dream of reaching. Have you noticed how the greatest victories in life don't belong to the most gifted, but to the most determined? Look around. How many people had every advantage and still gave up before they saw breakthrough? And how many reached their goal, not because it was easy, but because they refused to give up? This world teaches us everything should be fast, easy, instant. But life isn't a 100-meter dash. Real life is a marathon, full of hills, falls, setbacks, and hard climbs. But it's not about finishing first. It's about not giving up, no matter what. About enduring when others quit along the way. We see this in the Bible. David wasn't the strongest, the most skilled, or even the obvious choice. He was just a shepherd boy, overlooked by his own family when the prophet came looking for a king. But God chose David because God doesn't see as humans do. He looks at the heart, not the appearance. David faced a giant with a sling and a stone, and the real miracle wasn't the aim. It was the courage. So how many times have you stood frozen before your giants, thinking you were too weak to win? What if, instead of running, you stood your ground with the same faith David had? We grow up thinking courage means not being afraid. But real courage is acting in spite of the fear. It's getting out of bed when your heart is heavy, trying again after failure, loving again after pain. Have you heard of Bethany Hamilton? A young surfer with a bright future who lost her left arm at 13. Everyone thought her career was over, but she got back on the board, trained through pain, and won again. Today, Bethany is a symbol of faith and resilience, and when asked how she did it, she simply says, "God." Now imagine if she had quit in those early hospital days, believing her story had ended in that loss. What about you? What's been holding you back? Rejection, fear of failure, not feeling good enough? How many dreams have you let go of because you believed you weren't capable? Listen closely. You are not what others said about you. You are not your mistakes or the no's you heard. You are someone who carries a promise, and your story still has the power to move the world. God's promises do not expire, even when everything around you feels lifeless and barren. Remember Abraham? He waited for many years to have a child, even though both he and his wife were very old. All logic said it wouldn't happen, but Abraham believed, and through faith, he witnessed the impossible. This teaches us something powerful. The waiting season never cancels what God has promised. Think about real life. People study for many years, fail exams countless times before finally succeeding. Couples try to conceive for a long time and hear discouraging reports. Business owners fall and rise again. These victories only happen because of one simple but powerful truth: perseverance. So today, with the full weight of a faith-filled word, I'm telling you, do not stop now. You may feel tired, wounded, or confused, but you are closer to the breakthrough than you think. It's always this way. The enemy strikes hardest when you're right on the edge of victory. Doubt multiplies just before the breakthrough. Fear shouts loudest when something new is about to be born. That's the moment to stand firm. Because there's no harvest without sowing, no miracle without faith, no resurrection without a cross. If you give up now, you will never see what God had waiting for you just around the next corner. So here's a challenge. For the next 15 days, choose something you were ready to abandon. Maybe it's going back to school, rebuilding a relationship, restarting prayer, or launching that forgotten project. No matter how small it seems, stick with it. Every single day, Pray before you start. Give thanks when you finish. If possible, share your commitment with someone you trust. Let them walk this path with you. At the end of these 15 days, you'll realize the real enemy of your victory was never your situation. It was the fear of pressing on. Now you know, those who don't quit, they win. Those who persist and they transform. Those who remain, they reap. Lift up your head, take a deep breath, and go again. The same God who called you will carry you through. You weren't born to stop halfway. You were created to reach places no one ever thought you could. Have you ever found yourself asking, how much longer? How long will this pain last? How long will this hard season drag on? How long will you keep waiting for relief that never seems to come? And even if you try to hold on to faith, deep down you feel tired. Like time is passing, but your life is standing still. That's when many start to believe God has forgotten them. But the truth is, there's a time set for everything. The Word of God says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven." That's not just poetic. It's a truth that keeps hope alive, because even your pain has an expiration date. It won't last forever. It's not eternal. And more than that, it's not meaningless. There is purpose in it, even if right now you can't see it, because God never does anything without meaning. Think about how pregnancy works. For 9 months, a new life is formed in silence, in darkness, hidden from sight. A mother endures pain, discomfort, and body changes, and sometimes she wonders if everything is truly all right. But at the appointed time, something new is born, and that's how it works with the pain you're going through now. It's shaping something hidden, something not yet visible, but it will come to life at the right time. The real issue is that we are in a hurry. We want God to act at the speed of our desperation. But He moves according to purpose, not panic, and purpose always demands a process. You might want to escape the battle today, but leaving too early could cost you what is being prepared for you. Sometimes the blessing you're waiting for can only be handed to a version of you that is still being shaped. And while that transformation isn't finished yet, the season of waiting continues, requiring trust. Maybe you're walking through what many call God's silence, a quiet season that feels heavy on the soul. You pray and hear nothing. You ask and get no answer. You cry and feel like heaven is deaf. But let me tell you something that changes everything. In the silence, God speaks in a different way. He speaks through the strength you didn't know you had, through your steps when you keep going without clarity. He speaks when you still find reasons to be grateful, even when nothing seems to make sense. God's silence is never absent. It's an invitation to grow, like a teacher who stays silent during a test. He didn't leave the room. He's watching to see what you've learned, how far your faith has come. And maybe you felt misunderstood, like no one can grasp what you're going through on the inside. You've tried to explain, but they judged you, said you're lacking faith, as if it's your fault for hurting. But God doesn't look at you like that. He sees every tear, every sigh, every time you try to rise again. He's not demanding quick results. He's loving you through the process, embracing you in weakness. His grace isn't a trophy for those who win. It's daily strength for those who keep going, step by step. If you could hear what heaven says about you today, you might break down in tears from pure relief. Because God isn't counting your failures. He's counting your steps, even the slow and trembling ones. And He's whispering, "I'm still here, just a little longer. You'll understand in time." Do you remember the story of Lazarus? Jesus heard he was ill, but instead of rushing, He waited. Lazarus died. People complained, doubted, questioned. But Jesus said, "This sickness is for God's glory." 4 days after Lazarus had passed, Jesus arrived and brought him back to life. Not a minute too soon. Jesus arrived after death to show that even when it all looks finished, He still has the final word. Maybe something inside you has died, a dream, a purpose, a desire, and you think it's too late. But God is saying, this is not the end. What feels like the end could be the moment a miracle is forming. And when you come out of this season, and yes you will, you won't be the same person you were. You'll be stronger, wiser, and more in tune with the voice of God, because pain changes and shapes us. Look at Viola Davis, today one of the most awarded and admired actresses in history. But her journey began in deep poverty. She endured hunger, shame, and rejection growing up. In interviews, she says her childhood was so painful that even remembering it would bring her to tears. But she never allowed that pain to stop her journey. Instead, she turned it into the fuel that pushed her forward. She waited for the right moment without rushing, and in due time, that moment arrived just as it was meant to. How many people do you know who are now enjoying their harvest, but no one saw them during their sowing season? Maybe today you feel like a seed, hidden beneath the surface, isolated, buried, and surrounded by darkness. But never forget, every seed planted with care, with faith, and at the right time will bloom and bring forth life. So right now, I invite you to pause, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and feel the air filling your body. Feel that you are still here, that even through everything, you made it this far, and that matters. If you've come this far, why would you give up now? Challenge yourself to live the next 30 days with patience. Yes, patience. Pray every single day with just these words. Lord, give me wisdom to understand your timing. Don't rush it, don't force it. Simply trust that things are unfolding in a way you may not yet see. Write down everything that feels stuck, everything that hasn't moved yet, and hand it to God day by day. You'll be amazed by what can happen when your faith stops demanding speed and starts embracing the process. You are not behind, you are being prepared, and what God has planned for your life will never be lost. God's timing is always perfect. Your waiting is not punishment. It is the womb where miracles are formed.